Well, today I'm out here beside a big spruce tree because I want to tell you a story that's called When Thou Walkest Through the Fire. Ooh, that's scary sounding, but that's part of a Bible verse. Well, let's get back to our story. There was a small car making its way up the mountainside on the main highway. And if you were watching it, you would notice that he turned off and he started driving up that mountain road. It was nothing but a gravel road, and pretty soon it turned into a dirt road as it wound its way through the trees, through the pines and the fir trees, up into the Michigan forest. Well, Bob, he was on his way to work, but he was also on his way home. I wonder what Bob does for a living. Well, pretty soon, Bob came to a little pullout along the side of the road, and he parked his car, and he knew he had a 25-minute walk to get home. So he started walking. He was walking through the trees. I don't know if it was like here. I keep slapping at the mosquitoes that are trying to get me. But he was walking. He brought all of his things that he needed with him, and he headed up that hill. It took him a while to get to the crowning top of the mountain, and he saw home. Home was 250 feet up in the air. Now, if you watch close, you can see what Bob's home looked like. I'm going to keep talking to you while you look. Can you imagine how many stairs you would have to go up to get to the top of a 250-foot tower? Yes, he lived in a lookout tower. That was the place where one man watched for miles around for fires, and that was Bob's job. Well, when he got to the top of the mountain, one of the first things he did was he took out his binoculars and he looked this way and he looked that way. He was looking to see if there was any little curls of smoke. He was watching for forest fires. Well, let's leave Bob for a few moments, okay? We're going to leave him up there maybe to get his lunch. Well, down in the forest, down by one of the creeks, there were two fishermen, and they had been fishing all morning long, and then they had gone kind of on a little hike. They were both hungry, so they decided to stop along the side of the trail and build a campfire and cook their lunch, which of course was fish, since that's what they had caught. Well, they built their little campfire and they sat down beside it. If you keep watching, you can see those two fishermen sitting by their campfire looking out over the water. Well, after they had eaten, they felt much better, and they were anxious to get back down to their fishing spot, which was a ways down the water. They went over to their little fire, and with their feet with boots on it, they kind of swished the fire around. They put a little dirt on top of it, and they thought, that's good enough. They didn't get down and look to see if there was still some hot coals there, or if there was any flames underneath, or if there was anything there to catch a fire. Well, they went off to continue fishing. Well, back to Bob now. Bob had had his lunch. Afternoon came, and he took out his binoculars, and he looked this way and that way, and then he saw it, a tiny little curl of smoke, and he looked at that, and he thought, I wonder I wonder if that's just a campfire and somebody's having a little lunch. I'll just keep watching it." So for the next few minutes, Bob kept watching. And then when he looked with his binoculars, he saw that the smoke was getting bigger, and underneath of it was an orangey red glow. And he thought, "Oh no, a fire." Well, Bob, he went over to the big piece of equipment that was in the middle of his, you could call it his house. It was just one room, but in the very middle of it, with windows all the way around, so Bob could see for 30 to 50 miles in every direction. There was a piece of equipment called an Osborne firefinder. And what Bob had to do, it was a big circle with a huge map in the middle of it. And it went around, and it had a big, you'll see it here right now. There's a big sight, and they could sight down the center of it. They could point it toward where they saw the fire, and they could tell exactly on the map where that fire was. And that's what Bob did. Then he went over to the telephone that they had. It was a special kind of telephone, but he dialed the number, an old phone that dialed, and he called the nearest ranger station to that area. And he said, "This is Bob Mason. There appears to be a forest fire starting in your area at coordinates," and he gave the exact coordinates so they could find it. And the ranger said, "We'll send someone out right away." So immediately, 2 rangers got into their pickup truck, and they had equipment in the back to fight a fire, and they drove to that place. They were able to get there exactly. And in front of them, you can look at the picture. The fire was already starting and going up the trees. Well, sure enough, it had been a campfire, but now it was a forest fire. The men tried to stop it, but with just 2 of them, they knew that there was no stopping it now. So they placed a call with the ranger station that monitors forest fires and has large groups of men that are on standby to fight a fire. And they called them, and they started on their way to that fire. And when they got there, oh, look at the next picture. It's no longer just a little tiny thing, it's huge. Hundreds of men went. They went directly into that fire area. They had shovels. They had all kinds of chemicals and all kinds of equipment. They had axes. And the first thing they tried to do was to cut through the brush and make a big bare area so that the fire, if the fire got close to that, there would be nothing for the fire to burn there. So that was the first thing they started to do. Well, Bob, up in top of his tower, could see that the fire was getting away. So he ran down those steps of his tower. He got in his little car, and he drove to the place where the forest fire was to see if he could be of help. Well, when he got there, the ranger said, "Yes, you can help us. What we need is somebody to drive ambulances right now. Could you please drive an ambulance?" And Bob said, I'd be glad to. So he got in the back of one of the ambulances and he hurled out a stretcher. And already there were firefighters that needed the help of a hospital of doctors and nurses. So he put people in the back of his ambulance and he drove down that mountain road to the nearest hospital. Well, he made numerous trips. Might of fact, Bob was there for 3 days when something else happened. While he had come back from the hospital with his ambulance, he had gotten out and he was looking in shock at the destruction in front of him. Those beautiful pines and firs, they were black now. And the fire was rosy red, jumping from top of one tree to the other. Well, while he was looking, a man came rushing out of the side of the fire, and he said, "Oh, can you help me? My friend, a tree fell on him, and he's broken his leg, and I can't get the tree off of him, and the fire's coming toward him. Please help me." Well, Bob, he ran to the back of his ambulance, and he had an old-fashioned stretcher in there made out of wood and canvas, and he grabbed that. It was light, and he started running to follow this man, and soon they were in the smoke. There was smoke all the way around them, and there was fire all the way around them. And when they got to the man was laying in a bed of pine needles. Do you know what happens if you put a match to pine needles? They go poof. The man was frightened. Well, Bob helped the other man push and push till they had moved that part of a tree off of his leg, and they lifted him carefully up on top of that stretcher, and as fast as they could carry him, they started out of the fire. But now, all of a sudden, there was no path anymore. They were surrounded all the way around by a circle of fire, trees burning as far as you could see. There appeared to be no place to go. They set down the stretcher to look around and see if there was some way of getting out of here. And when they set the stretcher down, the poor injured man was terrified, and he reached up and he pulled on Bob's coat, and he said, "Would you please pray? Please pray." Well, then Bob thought of something. You know, Bob had been raised in a home where he was taught all about Jesus and God and his protective care. But when Bob had left home, he had kind of gone a different way. He had forgot about Jesus, and he wasn't living the way he knew he should be. That was his quick thoughts. But deep down in his heart, he still knew Jesus. And he bowed right down. He said, "Oh, Father in heaven, I know I haven't done what I should do, but oh, please help us to get out of here. You know the fire can kill us. Please help us to get out." When he stood up, Bob heard a voice, and the voice said, "Turn a little to the right." And he looked at the other two men that were with him, and he said, "Did one of you say something?" And they went, "We didn't say anything." Bob looked around, and he heard it again, "Turn a little to the right." He didn't wait to hear a third time. They grabbed that man up on the stretcher. He turned to the right, and not too far down, he saw a fairly deep creek running through the woods. There was their salvation. They ran to that creek as fast as they could. The fire was so hot all over them, they were getting singed. They took the injured man and they sat him in the middle of the creek. And they got in the creek. They sat down as flat as they could. And then they pulled that stretcher that they had with them, that canvas stretcher, and they dunked it in the creek. And they put it up over their heads like this. And then they took water and they splashed it up all over themselves. They were so afraid. But Bob was praying again. Oh, Father, thank you. I won't forget you again. I promise I won't forget you again. Thank you for saving us. Well, soon the fire got closer and closer and closer, and the trees all along the creek were on fire. It was like being in an oven with hot water. But it was the best they could do. They kept splashing up water. Sometimes it got so hot that they had to hold their breath and they went under the water. Fire goes fast when the wind is blowing. And the wind was blowing. The only advantage to that was, of course, it was burning. It was blowing away from where it had already burnt. So soon, the fire went right over the top of them. Oh, they were down in that water. They kept throwing water up onto that canvas that was over top of them. But pretty soon it wasn't so hot. They pushed the stretcher over and they peeked out of the water. The fire was going that way, away from them. Oh, but they knew they had to get out of there, because what if the wind changed and came the other way, back toward them? They scooted that stretcher out of that creek and put their comrade on top of it and made their way out, walking down the stream till they got far enough down where the fire wasn't burning, and they went toward the main fire camp. Do you know, boys and girls, that even if for some reason we wander away from Jesus, He still cares about us and wants us back. And He will send a voice, He'll send an angel, He'll do all sorts of things to help you. You know, there's a Bible verse that says, before they even call, I will answer. Isn't God wonderful? I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.